great.
Okay.
Do you want
Yeah,
me,
let, let,
Jake,
let,
do you want me to leave my camera on, or do you want me to stop my video until
I would stop your
they start?
video for right now, and then when I get on, I'll welcome everybody. And then Arsal, are you just going to start recording right away?
So Han is already doing that. He started recording at 5:57 for YouTube. So we're already in recording. And Han is here to check if anything goes wrong.
Okay, so Han's already recording. Okay, so
Yeah,
we'll need to edit this afterwards then.
No, yeah, we don't. Yeah, we can just do that. And then we have 20 in the waiting room. So should I start letting in or?
Wait for just a second. Make sure that you can see me clean. Can you see me okay?
Yeah, and let me just.
Hold on.
Okay, I can see you, but now you're muted. So let's make sure that your audio is going to be okay.
Okay.
Okay, Mimi, you're back. That's great. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Okay, so
Hold on.
Yeah.
Give me 30 seconds.
Fine. Yeah.
All right. Let's do it.
You good to go? Okay, I'm muting myself.
I think so. I mean,
okay. Okay, there's 25. Letting them in, muting myself. If either of you need anything, I'm here. So.
Thank you. Hi, everybody, and welcome. Please turn on your cameras. Hi, everybody. You can turn on your cameras and audio. Good to see everyone.
Hi, good to see you.
Okay. Some of you saw me this morning and this afternoon when we had class. So good to see you again to many of you. We have a very, very special guest. I'm going to introduce her in a minute, but this is a very big treat. So please have your cameras on, have yourselves muted, but definitely have your cameras on. Definitely listen in, because an opportunity to listen to somebody like this is not common at all. So this is a very, very wonderful opportunity that we have. So please turn on your camera, even if you're in a car, even if you're camping in the middle of the woods, definitely turn on your cameras. Okay. All right.
Jake, my camera still have problems.
Oh yeah, no, sure. You and I talked before. That's fine. You're the only person, but everyone else should turn on their cameras.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. All right. Fantastic. Good to see everybody. Okay, I think I'm about to begin. So let's go ahead and do that. This is a very, very special opportunity for us. Hello and welcome to ITU Presents. We are honored to have with us today Mimi Intagliata, who is an incredible person in the theatrical world. She has been in theater for over 30 years, and currently she is the Director of Production Operations at Disney Theatrical Group, an organization that you've definitely heard of. She is absolutely brilliant. She is here to talk with you about her career, her experience, and to shed some light on what's happening in the world. Mimi, without any further ado, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. We are honored to have you, and welcome.
Thanks, Jake. It is really a pleasure to be here with you all today. And I'm so pleased to be talking about theater and the theater industry, especially to a group who does things that I have absolutely no idea about. Tech and technology, computers, totally beyond me. So I hope that I can bring a little of my world to you, and hope that you will enjoy it. So I'm gonna put my PowerPoint up here. And sorry, apologies. Now I see I did this flawlessly. See, I'm not a technical person. This is my problem. Well, I'm a theater tech person, but I'm not a technical. All right, let me stop sharing for just a minute. because I had this working much better before. So let's try that one more time.
What I'm going to do, Mimi, because we're
Mhm.
going to record this, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you again.
Sure.
And so I'm going to, so while you're getting up there, I'm going to introduce you again. And just before we start, I want to ask everybody who's out there, is your audio good? Can everybody hear? Just give me a thumbs up to let me know whether your audio is good. Can everybody hear? Okay, great. I really wanted to make sure that we can
Jake,
see that.
yeah, and Jake,
All
just
right.
before we do that, I want to make sure I get this sharing properly because I had it before and now it doesn't want to do it. So, okay, now
Okay.
try again. You guys can't see anything, right?
No, we don't.
You know, before, of course, before we did this, it was all.
Of course, but that's what. So this is a great beginning of the conversation. In theater and in production, the one thing that always happens is technical difficulty,
Yeah,
and that is something that's really important in any sort of business in theater. Is that technical difficulty is for sure what's going to happen. A director doesn't show up on time. An actor gets sick. An actor forgets their lines. So many things happen. A light bulb breaks. So this is standard operation in production. Now this is a class, so I can talk with the students while you're prepping, Mimi.
okay, yeah.
I can see your presentation actually.
Yeah, I just can't get it into the format that I want. There we go. Got it now. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
So let me stop
All
sharing.
right, great. So I am. No, you should share. That's
Yeah.
that's fine.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Hello and welcome to ITU Presents. I want to let you know that we are very honored to have with us an executive who has been in the theatrical business for well over 30 years. Mimi Intagliata, who is the Director of Production Operations at Disney Theatrical Group, is here with us. It is not often that you're able to have access to somebody like Mimi. So we appreciate that you have come on today. Thank you so much for joining us. And please let us know what you'd like us to know today.
Great. Thank you, Jake. I am so pleased to be here with all of you. It's such an honor to speak to such a nice group of people who do things that I can't even conceive of doing. Technology, computers, it's not my specialty. So it's great to be coming into your world and hope that I can bring my world to you a little bit. So as Jake said, I'm currently working as the Director of Production Operations at Disney Theatrical Group. Disney Theatrical Group does all of the Broadway shows, Disney Broadway shows. You've probably heard of Aladdin, The Lion King, recently Frozen, also Beauty and the Beast. So we do all the Broadway shows. We do the touring shows that travel across the country of those same shows. And then we do these shows all over the world. We either self-produce or do them with our partners, our producing partners all over the world. So that's essentially what we do at Disney Theatrical. And I am part of the team that brings the shows from, as I like to say, from the page to the stage. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. So, all right, moving on. Okay, so my background is in theater. I've been doing theater essentially my entire career. I was really, as a kid, I did a lot of performing, just, in high school, musical theater. And I went to college at Indiana University in Bloomington a very long time ago for theater. And my goal was to become an actor. And essentially, what I realized was that unfortunately I was less talented than my peers. And I also didn't have the tenacity to be an actor. Acting takes a lot of tenacity and a lot of dealing with rejection. And that was not something that I was particularly good at. So it really wasn't at the end of the day for me, acting. But fortunately, I was more organized than my peers, and some of my professors and an older student who was a friend of mine kind of recognized that. And they said, you should really be a stage manager. And so I started out as a stage manager. And then I ended up over the course of my career being a prop person and a lighting technician, and then eventually a production manager, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. But I have experience in children's theater, dinner theater, regional theater, touring theater, and Broadway. I've done a lot of different things, which is, in my opinion, the mark of somebody who's had a good run in the industry, is doing lots of different things in theater, because that's a way to kind of build your skill set. So how did I get here? As I said, when I was in college, it became evident kind of early on that I was probably not going to be an actor. So I started stage managing. And essentially, for those of you who don't know what stage managing is, basically a stage manager helps the director kind of and choreographer kind of run the show, run rehearsals, make sure that the actors are where they're supposed to be at the right time, make sure the rehearsal room is run properly. They usually have a team of a couple of people who work with them. There's usually kind of a head stage manager or production stage manager, and then a couple of assistants. And they make sure that the rehearsal runs well. They take down all of the blocking, which is, where the actors walk and move at any given time in the show. They support the choreographer. They kind of run the room in rehearsals, and they keep track of everything, where the props go, who's on stage when, who has entrances and exits, what side of the stage they're coming in and out of. So the stage manager really is responsible for helping the director get the show up on its feet. And that's in the rehearsal studio. And then when the show moves into the theater, the stage manager runs technical rehearsals. So the stage manager calls all of the cues. And when we say cues, we mean, lighting cues, when the lights change, when scenery moves on stage, when audio sound cues happen. The stage manager is the person that is the production stage manager, is calling all of those cues. And then they usually have a couple of assistant stage managers who run either side of the stage, who make sure, that the actors are safe, that the scenery is moving the way it's supposed to. They really are the ones who make sure that the show functions on a nightly basis once they get into the theater. So that's what a stage manager does. And I really enjoyed that. I had a great time stage managing. I stage managed for over 10 years. I stage managed on tours. I stage managed, as I said, I started out, my first professional job was stage managing for a children's touring theater. And that was me and 4 actors in a van with all of the set and the props and the costumes in the back of the van, driving to elementary schools, sometimes 2 a day. And we'd spend an hour setting up the show, and then we'd do an hour-long show, and then we'd break the show down, and we'd put the show back in the van, and we'd drive to the next school. So that's how I started out. And then I worked at a dinner theater. You probably don't, some of you might not even know what dinner theater is. Dinner theater is where you actually come into a building and you eat dinner. They have a buffet, and you have dinner, and then you watch a show, and then you have dessert at intermission, and then you watch the second half of the show. There's not a lot of those around anymore, but it was a great experience. At the dinner theater, I was not only the stage manager, but I was the lighting person, I was the prop person, I was the carpenter. Occasionally, I was the costume person, even though I can't sew. So that was a great experience. I had to do a lot of different things, and that happens a lot in theater, because there's a lot of theaters that don't have a lot of money. And so we are often called upon to do lots of different things and fill lots of different roles. So interestingly, at the dinner theater, I found out that the people who owned the dinner theater also had a touring company. And so I got hooked up with this touring company, and we toured shows all across the country. And I did what was called bus and truck tours. And that means that literally we traveled the show in trucks. Most tours, and I'll talk about this in a little bit later, but most tours travel shows in trucks. But the type of tours I was doing, there were very small shows. So there were only 2 or 3 trucks maybe. And then the crew, was like me, the stage manager, and the carpenter, the lighting person, prop people, we all traveled on a rock and roll bus. So a bus with bunks in it. We would sleep on the bus overnight and drive professional driver would drive us from city to city. And we would play literally one night tour, one night shows. So we'd roll in the morning at like 8 o'clock in the morning. We'd load the show in, we'd put the show up, and the cast would roll in later that afternoon, and we'd do a sound check, talk about how the show was going to go that day. We'd do the show, and then we'd take it all down, put it back in the trucks, and off we would go. So that was quite an experience. Literally playing one night at a time, doing a show almost every single night in a different city. So that was quite a difficult experience. But when I woke up on a bus at about age 30, and I hadn't had a shower in a couple of days, I said, I think it might be time to move on. So I got into production managing, and basically production managing in theater is kind of the next level up from stage managing. So the production manager on a show will essentially help formulate the budget for a show and work with the director and the creative team, the designers, to do all of the logistics necessary, technical and logistical, scheduling, budgeting, to get the show on the stage. So the production manager is really kind of, if the center of the wheel with all the spokes going out to the rest of the wheel. The production manager makes sure that the set gets built on time and on budget. Same for the costumes, works with the lighting designer to make sure the lighting package is rented and loaded in, the sound package. So the production manager is really central to getting the show, again, from the page to the stage. And the production manager works with the stage manager as well and coordinates with the stage manager, who is handling, things on the stage on a moment-to-moment basis and running the show. So I moved into production managing, and I was a production manager for this touring company. And then eventually I got hired by a Broadway producer, the Dodgers, who produced a show called Jersey Boys, you might have heard of. They didn't produce that when I was there. I did get to work on 42nd Street and Urinetown and a couple of other shows that didn't work out so well. So I was a production manager within their general managing office. And general managers kind of are the other half of the kind of the flip side of the production manager. So the general managers handle all the business aspects of theater. So general managers hire people, do payroll, pay people, and work deals. They take care of the deals with the designers and the creatives. They write the larger budget. The production manager will do the physical production budget, but the general manager will do the salaries and put together the larger budget. So the general manager is kind of the business aspect of things, and the production manager is kind of the technical and production aspect of things. So the production manager and general manager work very closely together. So I was the production manager within kind of a general managing office, general managing and producing office. So that was the next step for me, is I went and worked there for several years and got to work on several Broadway shows and tours. So after that job, I kind of floated around a bit, and then I landed at a regional theater in New Jersey called Paper Mill Playhouse. And I was the production manager and later director of production there. And in a regional theater setting, a production manager, is again pretty much what I described, making sure that the scenery gets built. We bid it out to various shops to make sure we were getting a good deal on the scenery, getting the best deal we could, getting it built on time and on budget. And again, supporting the design and creative team to get their vision onto the stage. So I was with Paper Mill for about 7 years, and we did a show that some of you might have heard of called Newsies, which is a Broadway musical. It wasn't a Broadway musical, I shouldn't say that. It was Newsies, the musical. And that was Disney. It was a partnership with Disney. And so we premiered that at Paper Mill Playhouse, and I got to work on that. And I got to know the folks at Disney Theatrical, and I got a call about 1.5 years after we did Newsies, and they said, would you like to come work for us? And I said, yeah, work for Disney, do Broadway again for sure. So that's how I landed at Disney. So that is how I got to where I am. And I do want I want to tell you all kind of the trajectory of my career, because I think I'm going to explain a little bit more like what kind of theater, what kind of theater there is in the industry. And I think it's interesting that I've actually worked my way through a lot of those types of theaters over the course of my career. So going back to our slideshow. So now you know kind of how I got here. So I might have used some terms as I was talking about all that. It could be a little bit confusing. So let's talk for a minute about exactly what is, the theater industry. What is that industry? So what most people know about theater is Broadway. That's obviously the biggest, most obvious type of theater. Now, Broadway is super specific. Broadway only exists in New York City, and it only exists within like a 10-block area. So there are about 40 Broadway theaters. I think it's 41 to be exact. And they basically exist between about 40th Street and about 50th Street in Times Square in New York City. And not anybody can just decide that they're a Broadway theater. You kind of have to be, you have to meet certain criteria. You have to be over 500 seats. You have to be in that area, and you have to be, generally speaking, a commercial endeavor. And you have to be in those particular theaters. And there are certain theaters that are designated as Broadway theaters. So Broadway is essentially a commercial enterprise. It's a money-making profit enterprise. And Broadway theater is produced by commercial producers who get together a group of investors who are interested in their show and invest in their show. Broadway is presented and produced via limited liability companies, which may not sound terribly interesting, but I find it very interesting, because what that means is that you have to show, to be an investor in a Broadway show, you have to prove that you're not using that money to feed your family, to pay your mortgage. You have to show that it's dispensable funds, because Broadway is a notoriously unsuccessful business. What people like to say about Broadway is you can make a killing, but you can't make a living. So approximately 3/4, somewhere between 75 to 80% of Broadway shows are actually financial failures. So they never make back the initial investment in the show. So if a Broadway show costs, let's say, $15 million to produce, many Broadway shows never even make that back. So I find that interesting, that you have to really be somebody with a lot of money in order to invest in a Broadway show, because it's such a dicey proposition that they don't want people losing their homes and not being able to feed their families. So it's a commercial proposition. People invest money and they try to make their money back. So that's Broadway. There are a couple of not-for-profit theaters that qualify as Broadway theaters, but generally speaking, it's a commercial enterprise where people try to make money. There's also off-Broadway and off-Broadway and off-Broadway and off-Broadway. Much of off-Broadway is not-for-profit. Off-Broadway theaters, famous theaters like Second Stage and the Atlantic Theater Company, they are not-for-profits because it's very difficult, as I've just stated, to make money in theater, to actually make a profit. So off-Broadway theaters are theaters in New York City that are smaller, usually 499 seats or less. And they could be anywhere from, down in the Village to somewhere on the West Side to on the Upper East Side. They're all over Manhattan and Brooklyn, Queens. They're generally smaller theaters. As I say, there's sometimes theater companies, though there are theaters that you can rent and put a show up. So sometimes they're commercial enterprises, often they're not-for-profits. And it's where a lot of people get their start before they come to Broadway. And there can be very, very good, excellent shows that are done. The Public Theater is an example. Most people know the Public, where Hamilton started. That's a not-for-profit off-Broadway theater. Touring. I mentioned touring. I did touring myself. I also worked on the tour of Newsies, the musical. Touring is essentially an arm of Broadway. So shows that start on Broadway usually go on tour. And that's just a way of making more money. So Hamilton, for example, show that many of you may know, on Broadway, it's now, it's been pre-pandemic, it was out on tour. So they basically take the show, they modify it so that it can travel. So we put the shows into, as I said, tractor trailers, and we travel them across the country. A show, like I was saying, the small shows that I worked on, 2 or 3 trucks. Newsies, the tour that we of Newsies, which was actually a smaller show in comparison to our other shows, was 9 trucks. Lion King is, I think, right currently around 18 trucks. Back in the day when big Phantom of the Opera was traveling across the country, I believe that was in about 30 trucks. So the tours can really vary in size, but then they can also vary as to how long they stay in a place, and that depends on their popularity. So Hamilton is sitting down for months in cities right now because it's very, very popular. The Lion King for years sat down for, very long periods of time. Now we're playing more like 2 to 4 week stretches. Newsies played about a week in every city, although we did longer. And then I did one-nighter tours. So there are all these levels of touring, but it is, again, a commercial enterprise. It's for money making. That's the point. And it can be very lucrative. Generally speaking, tours end up making money. They don't tend to close because usually you can kind of figure out what your economic position is going to be for that tour. So it occasionally happens that they close, but usually the tours will have a run of, a couple of years, maybe longer. Lion King has been touring for over 20 years. So it's obviously one of the most successful pieces of theater ever produced. And it's been out there for a really long time. Then there's regional theater. I mentioned that I worked at Paper Mill Playhouse. That's a regional theater. These are theaters all over the country, large and small. Basically, regional theater is a catch-all phrase for theaters that exist in assorted places that are ascribed to an equity contract called the LORT contract, which is the League of Resident Theaters. LORT is as I said, it's just an equity contract. So it's just a way of referring to this group of theaters, but they can be very large. So LORT A, they can be down to LORT E, which is a very small theater. So there are various levels of theaters, but regional theaters are, generally speaking, not-for-profit. So again, they have a not-for-profit status. They have a tax incentive. Nobody's getting rich usually. And they have what we call both earned and unearned income. Earned income being ticket sales, unearned income being donations, grants from the government, grants from foundations. So regional theater is usually not for profit, and it is in the regions. So we're not talking about primarily New York. We're talking about, Chicago, St. Louis. I mean, there are touring roadhouses in most major cities as well. But these regional theaters are resident theaters. They have a staff, they stay there, they're located in a city, and they produce theater, year round or on a particular schedule. So that's regional theaters. And that's kind of the other really big piece of theater that exists in the industry. And then there's all the rest: community theater, educational theater, summer stock, rep. It's, there's just all kinds of theater that goes on in the country. Most of the rest is, again, not for profit. But there are some small commercial theaters. The dinner theater that I worked at, for example, back in the day, that was a for-profit enterprise. But there are a lot of community theaters. We have like 3 in my small town here in New Jersey. So all kinds of other theater that goes on. Kids putting on a show in the barn, whatever. Lots of other types of theater as well. All right. So when we talk about theater technology, and I'm just going to jump into that because you all are technological people. Technology is really important in theater, and that is something that's basically started happening in the last, probably, I'm going to say, since kind of the middle of the 20th century. I think that most people don't often think about theater as a technological piece of entertainment. And I think that's because theater is such a human form of a human art form that we don't really think about it as technical in the way that we do film. And so it's hard for us, I think, to really grasp how important technology is in theater, but it's extremely, extremely important. And it's become important, as I say, over the course of the last, probably about 75 years. So this falls into various categories: scenery and props, lighting, audio, and projections. So I'm going to talk a little about each of these, but I just want to sort of say that, like, really, prior to the middle of the 20th century, most of theater technology was very basic. It's an old business. I mean, it's probably the oldest form of art and culture in the world. I mean, the Greeks were doing this way back when. So it's been around a very, very long time. And most of the technology and the way that they managed the shows was done through, ambience means and architectural means. So they had the Greek theaters that were outside, lit by the sun. Going to the old Globe back in England, where they had, candles, back to the 18th, 19th century, where they had gas lights. This incredible explosion of technology, like much other technology, though, has really only happened over the last 75 years. And the rate of change in the theater industry, like in all other industries where it comes to technology, has been really incredible. And interestingly, I think I've seen a lot of that change over the course of my career, really in the last 30 years. So that rate of change has been incredible as well. So when we talk about scenery, technology and scenery, we're talking about kind of a couple of key things. We're talking about the fabrication of the scenery. We're talking about the running of the shows, and we're talking, and also then prop fabrication. So scenic fabrication, CNC routers, water jet machines, all of these things are highly technical, run by computers, and can do incredible things. CNC routers, you can give them a pattern and they can cut a scenic piece. They can route a scenic piece, and it's all done with computers, all pre-programmed and all robotic. It's amazing. Water jet, same thing. So it's a high pressure water jet that can cut all kinds of materials. Winch motors and chain motors are used to run the show, to move the scenery within the show, as are hydraulic lifts. Automation consoles, those are what control those pieces of technology. And certainly in prop fabrication, 3D printing has been huge. So I want to just talk a little more about technology on the scenic side. Motors have changed. Back in the day, prior to automation, you had to have human beings move scenery. So, that you needed like 10 people backstage to move the scenery. And now we can move it effortlessly with the touch of a button. So that's had an effect not only on, the way the backstage runs, the types of scenery we can build. It's also had somewhat of an effect on how shows are written, how they're presented. We used to do something that was called an in-one scene. So on stage, we have wings, and we call them in one, in two, in three. These are the wings that are separated by soft goods, so that we have different playing spaces, different planes where we can play, closer to the audience, farther away from the audience. So prior to automation, you would have to bring the actors downstage close to the audience and bring in like a curtain or a drop. And then you'd have to change the scenery behind that curtain or behind that drop, because that's what it took. It took people doing that. Well, now we can automate a lot of that. And so we don't have to have those weird scenes where we bring everyone downstage and we bring in something to hide everything. So now you see a lot more cinematic movement in theater. You see things move from scene to scene more seamlessly, because we can automate things and move things on and off stage so much more easily. And we have an automation console that moves everything. and we time everything, and it can all be coordinated. So that's all done. That's usually done with winch motors, or hydraulic lifts, where we have lifts under the stage that can lift people up to stage level. And then we have chain motors. Chain motors, are up they're the rigging that they can hold up lighting truss and other types of scenery. But now we have winch motors that are variable speed that can talk to the automation console, giving us more options for that. So when you go to see a show, especially a Broadway show or a show at a large regional theater, chances are that you are seeing lots of things being moved with computers and being moved with technology, and not as many things being moved with human beings. So that's been hugely important. And the technology of that is hugely important to the way that we tell stories in the theater. In addition to scenery and props. Oh, and props, I'm sorry, I should just say that obviously 3D printing, when it comes to props, 3D printing is just mind-blowing. The fact that we can have a designer draw something up and turn it into a 3D file and then have it printed in the right color with all the right specs is amazing. So that's been a huge leap for prop fabrication. Still, a lot of things are done by hand. It's a highly artisanal piece of our industry, but the 3D printer is changing. It has changed it and is going to continue as 3D printing evolves. It is going to hugely change prop fabrication and scenic fabrication as well. So that's a big piece of technology for us, I think, now and in the future. Lighting. So in lighting, we are basically talking about moving lights and the control consoles for the moving lights and the other lights, and then also LED technology. So moving lights are a relatively new technology for us. They really came into use starting in about the late 1980s, early 1990s. I myself actually worked with some of the first moving lights, which weren't actually moving lights. It was actually a static light that had a mirror in it, and the mirror moved, and you would focus it with the mirror. And those things, I had to focus it every single night because it wouldn't hold the focus. So those were early moving lights. Prior to that, we had just static lights. So, just various types of static lights. And the downside of that was you had to have, anytime you wanted what we call a special. So you wanted like this one pool of light right here that an actor was going to stand in. So if you had too many of those, that's the only thing that light could do, was that particular special. So you might have to have a lot of lights for those specials, and you were limited to what you could do with static lights. So moving lights have changed that completely, because now you have one light that can be a special here, over there, back there. And so it's helped us to reduce the number of lighting units we have. I mean, I say that, but lighting designers still put a lot of lighting units in shows, but we don't have to have all these different specials. We can have one light can serve a lot of different purposes. They also can automatically change color. They have various patterns. They can have a hard focus, a soft focus. So they're incredibly flexible lighting instruments. So lighting designers just have so much more flexibility, so many more options when it comes to lighting. Moving lights have done that. Also, it has helped us on tour because, as you can imagine, it takes a long time to focus static lighting units, a long, long time. And if you have moving lights, there's a procedure where you can zero them to particular places, and you don't have to go through every single solitary cue to make sure that they're going to hit their marks. So it's really helped on tour to help us move faster, be more efficient, and be able to reduce our focus time. And it's also just cool. Moving lights are really cool because they actually become like part of the show. And you see the lights now, you see the lighting, and it's part of the action of the show, and it really adds to the ambiance of the show. So I love moving lights. They're very cool. And the consoles, have changed so much because of that. Back when I was in college, we had what was called a 10 scene preset board. And what that was like you had 50 dimmers and you had all these little slides that would dim each channel, which controlled a group of lights. And you had 10 of these. And like we had pieces of paper with all the levels, and you'd have to like go and change everything by hand. So lighting designers were limited as to how many cues they could put in a show. And now they have computer consoles. You can have, I mean, hundreds and hundreds, and there's virtually no limit to how many cues you can have in a show, because you have a computer console that can change the cue very quickly. Whereas, before we were doing things manually. So sometimes, and that was a 10 scene preset, there were also 2 scene presets. You could only set up 2 cues. And so you'd have to go back and forth between the two presets. So you could do like, you literally, there were times you would have to say to the lighting designer, we can't set that cue up fast enough, and they'd have to cut a cue. Nowadays, that just doesn't happen. A lighting designer can have cues just going like, half a second, quarter of a second right on each other. So I think when I first started calling shows as a stage manager, there were maybe, 200 cues in a show. Now there's, 500, 600 cues in a show. LED technology has also changed a lot. Obviously, power draw is huge. Incandescent light is such a huge power draw. Also makes things very hot. Now we have LED technology, much less power draw, and also lots of options for color mixing. Initially, the LED light was very cold. I think we all had kind of a reaction to it of being very cold, but LED now, the LED lighting has gotten so good that it's warmed up a lot, and we really, many shows are shifting over to completely total LED lighting. So that's been a really exciting technology. In addition to lighting, then we have audio. And audio, it seems like it wouldn't be that big of a deal, but the microphones and speakers, consoles, that's been obviously something huge that's helped us. The wireless microphones, the body microphones that the actors can wear. Sometimes you see them, sometimes they're up here on their head or over their ear, kind of boomed like this. And that's been huge, because the intimacy that we can create with that and the sound quality we can create with that is just incredible. And the isolation, so we can really, sound designers can really isolate the orchestra better. They can control the orchestra. They can control the singers on stage. They can blend and mix to create a really pleasing sound for us, so that we can really hear all the lyrics and support the actors so that they're not losing their voices. All of that's really, really important. Also, the consoles, again, much like with lighting, consoles used to be manual, and the audio engineers would have to literally raise and lower, all the faders. Like when somebody walked on stage, the fader would have to go up. When they walked off stage, it would have to go out. They're mixing large ensembles all by hand. It was very, very hard, and there was a lot of opportunity for errors, even though our sound engineers are and were terrific. And they would also have to like EQ each person individually with the pots on the console. Now, again, that's all digital, just like with lighting, all digital. They pre-program everything. Yes, they kind of mix live. There may be a night when things sound a little bit different, and they may be tweaking things as they go, but all the cues are in the board. They just press the button, and the cues, they call them flying faders. Some of the boards have flying faders, which is kind of cool because the faders all move on their own. And they press the button, it's all pre-programmed. So I think those are for me. And again, I'm not a super technical person, so I can't tell you about how speakers have changed or how, some of the other technology has changed. But for me, what I see, microphones and consoles have been huge in our industry. And have really brought us to a place. Again, a show like Hamilton, when you think of the rapid fire nature of that show, there's so many lyrics in that show, and it would be so hard without those wireless body mics right there on their person, able to pick their voices up so that you can understand what they're saying. So very, very important. Okay. So projections is the last technical piece I want to talk about. Projections, front projection, which is the classic projection you think of. And then you have LED walls and panels and curtains and LED tape. And basically there's two pieces to this. There's the integration with the scenery, and then there's the substituting for scenery. So we now have started to integrate LED panels and and curtain and tape into our scenery, so we can light our scenery up, make it appear different, change its color by marrying, fiberglass and LED technology. You can get some great effects. Frozen, as a matter of fact, Frozen, the Disney musical that I've worked on, that uses this particular type of technology where things are lit up and can really change the appearance of the scenery. So that's been a really exciting development. Also, LED wall and back wall in theaters and shows now we can use, instead of creating a bunch of different drops or scenic pieces that are at the back of the scenery. So we can change it, and it can change very, very easily and quickly. And we create lots of different looks with these LED walls at the back of the stage. And then sometimes we substitute for scenery. Sometimes projections help us because instead of building a piece of scenery, we can approximate it with projections, and we can, substitute rather than, as I'm saying, building 4 different things. Maybe 1 or 2 of those things become projections, and we can make that look better or worse. Sometimes it doesn't work very well. Sometimes it works great. I think for Frozen, it worked actually really well. For Elsa's Ice Palace, we created a lot of that with projections on the LED wall, and that ended up looking really cool. The other thing exciting about projections right now is that there's this ability to track. There's an ability to track projections on scenic pieces by using wireless technology. So you can put a transmitter on a piece of scenery or on a human, and you can actually, the projection or the moving light, quite frankly, can follow those things by having a transmitter and receiver and sending that signal to the moving light or the projector, so that you can actually follow it. And the projector can actually, by placing several transmitters, you can actually cut it to the actual piece of scenery. So that's been very exciting, and that's really happened over the last kind of 20 years. I worked on a show that had heavy projections, and it was called Pawnee projectors, and those were actually glass slides that were done by hand, and that was just back in like kind of the mid 90s. So, just in the last 25 years, huge leaps in projection that have had a really great effect, I think, in general, been hugely important for our industry. So that's kind of the technology. I just want to mention, given where we are today, what's going on in the world is kind of the pandemic. I think that this is sort of the next thing. Like, what is the pandemic going to do as regards theater, storytelling, and technology? I think we've already seen it. We've seen a lot of people going online, doing Zooms, figuring out ways to do shows, virtually. I think the pandemic is actually going to open up a whole new set of things. And I think we're going to see people producing theater and performing and creating theater in very, very different ways after the pandemic. And I think in some ways that's really cool and a good thing. Obviously, at a great cost, that's not worth it. But if that's one thing that comes out of this, as kind of an opportunity to open our minds and think about new ways to do things, I think that's kind of cool. So I think I'm at the end of my spiel. Jake?
Well, Mimi, first of all, the world that you're in and the access that you've had throughout your career is just astounding. So, I have a background in media and entertainment and a lot of, film and TV, and also some time in the theater as well. So you and I will have fun talking offline about that. At one point, I was actually in Kabuki play,
Oh,
which is
wow.
definitely a very special kind of theater.
Yes.
So, while people are thinking about their questions, I'm going to kick off some questions if you don't mind.
Sure.
And then everybody, of course, in this group is lucky enough to be able to ask questions of you. So feel free to ask questions, everybody. I'm going to start off by asking a question really about, a lot of people when they think about the theater, and you're talking about Broadway specifically. So the work that what you're doing now. So your background, of course, regional theater in certain locations that are out throughout the United States and other parts, right? And then you're talking about off Broadway, right? So the Broadway is that area that everybody knows, 42nd Street and that immediate area, right? That's the famous Broadway theater area, right? And then
Yeah.
the off Broadway and then off Broadway that are close but not quite. The seating is smaller, right? So you've worked
Yep.
in all of these different fields, and the question that I would have for you is, because I've worked on productions that have millions of dollars, and I've
Mm,
worked on productions
yeah.
that have very little money. In fact, I've worked on a lot of productions where it's like, hey, I know that actor and that director, and this person has a camera and this person has a light. Let's go out and shoot a short film, right? So when I think about, and when I think about Iron Man, for example,
Yeah.
that to me is like Broadway. That's like Broadway in the
Mhm.
theater world, right? That's the top
Definitely.
thing. That's the multi-million dollar production. So in your 30 plus years of experience, what are some of the most incredible team experiences that you've had?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think first of all, being on tour, being on those one night or bus and truck tours. I mean, that's just there is nothing that will bond people faster than living on a bus and not showering for a few days. There's absolutely nothing that will bond people faster than that. It is so hard, and you have to be young, I think, and you just have this mentality of everybody kind of being in it together and really pulling together, because the more you help each other, the better day you're all going to have, because there are bad days on those kinds of tours. There are very bad days. There are literally days where we walked into a high school, and the high school kids, like and I'm not kidding when I say this, we were walking to a high school one day and the Fox Theater in Atlanta the next day. And I don't know if anybody's ever been to the Fox. The Fox is a humongous 5,000 seat theater in Atlanta, gorgeous. So, but we literally might have been in a high school the day before. So, you walk into the high school and it's high school kids helping you load in, and they're here for an hour and then they leave. And then somebody else comes in and then they leave. And all day you're like, just crazy. And then you do the show, and then the show comes down and you look around and you're like, where are the kids to help us load out? And then the teacher's like, oh, well, they had to go home. They have school tomorrow. And you're like, wait, but we have to take this show out now because we have to go to another city. So like when you have days like that, that bonds you so quickly. So I think that's one thing. I think that working at Paper Mill, we had a financial crisis at Paper Mill when I was there, and that really bonded all of us there at Paper Mill. We really all pulled together, and we literally saved the theater from closing. And now it's extraordinarily successful. So that was a hugely bonding moment. And then Newsies, I was so lucky to work on Newsies. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Newsies, but if you haven't seen it, there's a film called Newsies, the Broadway musical, available on Disney Plus, and you should check it out because I worked on it and it's really cool. There was something about that show. Everyone who worked on it, everyone who ever touched it loved that show, and it was always a great experience. And that it was just, and I can't even tell you exactly what it was, but something about that show really bonded us all, the creatives, the cast, the staff. We all had a great time working on that show. So that was a lot of fun. And that was so cool because so that was a tour that we then filmed and made into a movie. And that was a very cool experience, because we were literally capturing capturing a stage show. And so it had to be kind of a little like a film and then a little like a Broadway show. So that was really fascinating to work on that.
Oh, that's wonderful. I put the name Newsies in the chat box, so if everybody's interested, that's the play that you're talking about. That was
Yeah.
really, some complications, but really the team came together and built it out. I think the official efficiency in teams and the kindness of other people working together really goes a long way. I'm going to open this up to questions to people in the audience. Please feel free to ask your questions. I have so many questions, but I want this to be your time with Mimi. So feel free to unmute and ask questions.
Hi, Mimi. My name's Tianxin Yan, and I'm actually a costume designer.
Awesome.
Since spring 2020, the pandemic happened. I have only got a few illustration jobs and one online production, and it's not really costume heavy. So that's when I turned back to school for digital art study. So what I wanted to ask is how do you think the COVID situation gonna affect live theater, not only now and in the future?
Yeah. So I think in addition to some new thinking about how we communicate with theater goers and how we present our shows, I don't think Broadway is going to change a lot, to be honest with you. It's, as I say, theater is an old, stodgy industry, and Broadway is the oldest and stodgiest of all of them. So I don't know that you'll see a lot of change with Broadway. I hope that Broadway will change in terms of kind of some of the marketing and using better some other platforms for that. But I think you're going to see a big change in the regions. And I think actually we're going to see a shift to the regions over the next few years. Broadway is going to have a hard time coming back fully until tourists are back. And people are sort of saying it's going to probably take until about 2025 until we really see the tourist levels of tourism that we'd seen pre-pandemic in New York. So Broadway is going to be slow to come back. But I think the regional theaters are going to come back pretty quickly, because that's your neighborhood theater, right? That's the theater down the way. And so people don't have to go anywhere. So I think that the regions are going to come back faster. And I also think the regions have really learned a lesson in this. And I hope that they take this opportunity to figure out some new ways to offer their content to people, because theater is expensive. And I can see a place where in the future, a regional theater might decide that, if you want to come and be an in-person subscriber, then it's 5 shows and you're going to pay X amount of money, but maybe you get some sort of a membership. And if you don't have to be a subscriber, but maybe you get a membership and you get access to 3 of those shows online, after they have their live run in the theater, or there's a completely online part of their season. And people can just, there's particular shows for the online subscribers. And then there's a set of shows for the people who are in the theater. So I think that's where I think we're going to see a change. I think we're going to see a change in the regions. And I think the excitement's actually going to shift out to the regions here for a little bit, which is great. I think that's really, because that's where you can do the exciting stuff. Broadway, you got to make money. In the regions, it's not for profit. So you can take a little more risk. You can be a little more risky and a little more cutting edge. And so that's what I hope that's what comes out of it. I hope that's where we get after the pandemic. I hope that answered your question. Okay.
Thank you.
That's a great question and a great answer. Thank you very much. Any other questions? I know people have been not DMing me, but putting this in the chat box. So feel free to ask. Don't just ask me privately. Go ahead and ask.
Yeah, I had a question actually.
Sure.
So I was thinking, kind of playing into this, but like the emergence of like immersive theater experiences, like Sleep No More and Then She Fell and all that. Do you see like traditional Broadway kind of shifting into that, or that as a competitor, or do you think they're definitely going to be separate with VR and everything else coming in technology play too?
I mean, I feel like those immersive.
Before you answer that,
oh, sure.
Yeah, before you answer, can you kind of explain the difference for some of the people who might not know who were here?
Sure. So Sleep No More is basically, when we say immersive, you're not sitting traditionally in a traditional theater where you're sitting in a seat and you're watching the show happen. Sleep No More is basically Macbeth, but it takes place in a multi-room venue where you move in the rooms and you move between the scenes and you experience the show, sometimes non-linear, in a non-linear fashion, but you move and the various scenes are taking place in various rooms. So yeah, I think I think that's a non-starter for Broadway, only because of the, I mean, you'll hear a lot right now. What people are talking about is that financially Broadway can't come back with limited capacity. And that's because basically our weekly operating expenses are very high. So, it costs, let's say, to run a Broadway show, it costs $950,000 a week. So in order to make that and then make some profit, we have to be at 60 or 70% capacity at minimum. So that's the kind of financial piece, and that's why you'll hear a lot of press saying that Broadway can't come back at limited capacity. By the same token, in order to have that kind of immersive experience, I don't know how you fit 1,000 or 1,200 people into that immersive experience. I think it could be done. I don't know if you could make money at it, is the problem. So I don't think that happens on Broadway. But I do think the VR thing is interesting. And I've been wondering a lot about, like, could you have a show where, you put the VR on for certain, you enhance, like it's enhancements, right? So you still have the show happening in front of you, but you have like a Google Glass on or something like that. And at various times, content is pushed to the Google Glass to enhance the experience of the Broadway show, by adding things into that you couldn't do on the stage, that even with all of our technology, we could not do. So I think there is that possibility. I think it has to get to a place where it would be kind of effortless, though, where you'd have to have like the glasses on and not even be thinking about it. Because if you're putting things on and taking things off, it takes you out of the moment. In theater, you want to be drawn in and stay in. We're actually, we've been talking about this with closed captioning too, because, actually open captioning, I guess, but trying to use Google Glass or something like that, something similar, to try and give folks who need subtitles, whether they have a hearing situation or a language situation, trying to get something where they can experience their show fully without having to look down all the time, and so we're trying. I think there's a lot of technology coming along that hopefully will be useful for that. And I think we could see that then transition at some point into like a VR additive thing, like you're saying.
With that, Mimi, in terms of technology, you talked about projection, being able to project and certain types of lighting and other things like that. When you have ability for like a digital screen or something like that, to be able to deal with visual effects and other things that are going, because I've been to some pretty high level productions where you'll have water and smoke and fire and all sorts of things going on, but you also have the element of, maybe rather than something physically on somebody, but maybe screens and layerings of the theater and the stage. What is some of that that's being discussed or being used?
I think, like I said, with Frozen, we're doing that a lot. I mean, we have the LED that's in the scenery that changes the look of the scenery completely. And then we have an LED wall upstage where we can change that content so easily, seamlessly. And then, I mean, there are some shows that are using, like literally LED panels for legs, which are the framing pieces. So I think that you're going to start seeing, yes, you're exactly right, a layering of all of this stuff. You're going to see LED integrated into the scenery, integrated with screens. We can project on scrim and drops. And I think, as I was mentioning, there's this technology now where you can track, and that's huge. You can track like people walking along the floor. You can track scenic pieces with projection and light with these RF. I don't know if they're RF. I shouldn't say that. With these transmitters, I think they work like wireless microphones. So you can transmit a signal and you can literally follow and change what's on a scenic piece, so from moment to moment. So yeah, I think you're going to start seeing a layering of all of those things. I think Frozen is probably the closest thing right now to doing that, but I'm sure you're going to see more and more of it as we go. And as this tracking technology starts to happen, we're going to be able to track people with lights and projection. It can be used. I mean, that's already being used actually in the Disney parks. And you can also use it for sound, so that when somebody walks off stage, their microphone automatically goes off. When they walk on stage, it goes on. But anyway, that tracking of the visual, effects, I think is going to start being added in as that technology evolves. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. No, the insight and the background you have is something that, we really don't have access to. That's why we're so lucky to have you here. Any other questions?
I had a question. Hi,
Sure.
Mimi, Radeja here.
Hi.
I actually wanted to ask you about, if musical Broadway shows have a very similar technical background that you're talking about, or does it depend from um, like show to show? Like, is it different?
Yeah. I think yes, it is different. A show, I mean, ironically, a show like Hamilton is not and I don't know if you all are familiar with that show. That's the big hit show the last few years, Lin-Manuel Miranda, the rap musical about Alexander Hamilton. That's actually a really pretty straightforward show. There's a turntable. So in the deck, which is the stage floor, there's a big circle that rotates. And in fact, I think it might be two. I think there's a middle one, and they can rotate two, like that. It's actually a pretty straightforward show, though. I mean, the turntable, and it's really incredible lighting, but it's not a super high tech show. Frozen, lots of technology, tons of technology. So yeah, it really varies from show to show, and I think it has to do with how you serve the story. So I think Frozen is a show that begged big technology. A show like Hamilton, it just isn't necessary, and in fact could take away. There are definitely shows that have been eclipsed by their technology. Titanic is a show that comes to mind. So there was a musical about the Titanic, if you can believe that. And that was, I want to say it was prior to the movie. It was not the movie. It was completely separate. But it had all of this hydraulics with, the ship doing this and people falling and things moving. And actually that show is really great. The score to that show is beautiful, but it kind of got overwhelmed by the technology, and it wasn't maybe the best way to tell that story. And so I think that the important thing is not to make it as technologically cool as you can. It's about serving the story. And if you think too much about the technology and you focus too much on that, you can lose your story. So it has to all be in service to the story. Because the reason we go see theater is we go see theater for the story. I mean, that's why, right? And to see people live on stage and to have an experience, which we're all, I think, desperate for right now, a human to human, sitting in the same theater with everyone laughing and clapping and crying together. We're desperate for that right now. But we go see for the story and for the characters. And so the technology has to be in service of that. And so I think it's important when you're putting together a Broadway show to make sure that you don't just say, well, let's add all the technology we can. And of course, every Broadway show has a different economic model. And, some producers want to spend more or less. With Disney, we're different because we're a corporation and we get money from the studio. We don't have investors like other shows. So we don't have to worry about the investors. Obviously, we want to make money and do well for the studio. But it also depends on the economic situation of that particular show. But in general, I think what you see is technology in service of storytelling. That's the important piece of it. Just running down running crazy with technology is not going to serve. if your story's not good and your music isn't good.
Oh, thank you so much.
Any other questions? That was a great question. It's a question in any type of production, I think, right, Mimi? Is in
Absolutely.
terms of, what level do you need? And, I think, I always talk in classes about the importance of story. And you talked about technology, you talked about the old school style of theater, right? But how, in terms of your experience, how does story play into success of the theatrical productions that you've been part of?
I mean, it's the most important thing. You cannot, I mean, between the music is also very important. If you have a great story, but the music is terrible, that's not so good. But I think that the story is key. You have to craft a story that people can work their way into. They have to be able to get into the story. I think it's one of the things that was so successful about Newsies is it's just a really cool story. It's about kids. It's about these newsboys and newsgirls. At the turn of the century, the 19th to the 20th century, selling papers and being taken advantage of by these huge corporations. And it's a story about how the kids fight back. That's a great story. Lion King. I mean, Lion King is a great story. And that's a perfect example of a show that's, yes, it's technical, but it's also very artisanal, right? So those masks and the puppets, they're all handcrafted and handmade. And they're based on very old storytelling models that, Julie Taymor, the director, studied in Asia. And forgive me, I don't remember the country, but she studied masks and puppets and that the use of those things in storytelling. Those things aren't really highly technical in the way that you would normally think of it. But that story, it supported that story, and the story is such a great story. I mean, it's essentially Hamlet, right? It's basically Hamlet, because we all keep telling the same stories over and over again, right? That's why I love it when people say, "Oh, this show is this show or that show, or this movie or that movie is so derivative." I'm like, listen, we've been telling the same 5 stories for the last 5,000 years. So just get over it with the derivative. Like, everything's derivative. So I think story is hugely important, and you can put all the bells and whistles on things you want to, but if it's not a story people can work their way into and identify with and sympathize with the characters, it's all for naught.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Does anybody have any other questions? I know Mimi is giving up her Saturday night to be with us, and we appreciate that greatly. Does anybody have any last question?
I just have a quick question, and it's really interesting where she works and everything, but I was wondering, is it any way that, like, if you're a major on business analytics, can you work in that industry?
So the theatrical industry is pretty it's pretty small and it's pretty basic. I would say it could be challenging, but what I will say is that for someone with kind of a math brain, what there is certainly is the opportunity to work. They do a lot of work now on demand-based pricing. Do you all know what demand-based pricing is? You know how when you go to look for an airplane ticket, and you look one day and it's $200, and you look literally the next day, and it's $500, and that's because the plane went from being 25% full to 40% full. And that's all based on algorithms. And we do the same thing in theater. This is done on Broadway. It's done in touring houses. It's done in regional theaters, and it's an algorithm. And somebody has to write those algorithms and research those do those analytics. So depending on what business analytics looks like, there's absolutely analytics in theater for sure. And that's on the ticket and selling side. It's on some of the data side, collecting data and information about subscribers and ticket buyers and theater goers. So yeah, there's definitely analytics in theater. Exactly how you get to that, I can't personally tell you, because that's not anywhere part of my job. But yeah, I believe there are analytics in theater, and I think you would just have to figure out how to connect the dots to get to a position like that.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
That helps a lot.
And I would say that, in terms of film finance, the same thing goes for Broadway finance, right? So if you have a business mind and a mathematical mind, there's a lot of finance that goes into theater, plus the analytics and looking at some of the actors, right? Just like when you're looking at movies, right? Certain talent tracks and does better, I'm sure, as well in maybe theater.
Yeah, I mean, and certainly
And
like oh, sorry, go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, no, that's what I was kind of asking. So yes, please go ahead, Mimi.
Yeah, certainly Disney, in other divisions of Disney, there's tons of business analytics. So disneycareers.com, it's a website. We post every job that is available across the company on disneycareers.com. And yeah, there's tons of opportunity, I would imagine, in film and television for that kind of analytics for sure.
Yeah. And if you end up loving it and figure out that you're a big finance person, you can go to Broadway and people will love you because you'll finance a lot of plays.
That's right. That's right.
You'll be everyone's best friend. I know a lot of theater people who are big financiers who are now producing a lot of feature films and doing other things because they love theater, but right now they can't invest. And so they're investing in film and TV projects. So I think there's a wide opening for a lot of everybody. I mean, a lot of you are, electrical engineering, there's opportunity in terms of robotics and other things. There's a lot in anything that Mimi's talking about. She had that slide of, those slides of technology. There's so much technology going on. But then at the core, you have that story. Mimi, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
You've been doing this for 30 plus years. It seems like you're so happy. You made the right choice. You made the right choice.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. I mean, in college, it was so hard because I was so upset that it was kind of evident that I wasn't going to be an actor. And now I wouldn't change it for the world. I mean, I've gotten to do so many cool things, and, I wouldn't change it for anything. And I do want to say, Jake, that for sure, your students here, I mean, there's a lot in theater happening theater's a small industry. I don't want to be too rosy about theater because it is a small industry as opposed to like film and television, which is huge. But in theater, there exists, people who do all of the front end programming. There are bespoke automation programs that are written at scenic shops. There's, programming that's written for lighting and lighting consoles, sound consoles. I do think robotics is in our future. I don't know how far in our future, but we'll get there. We'll be the last ones. Everybody else will do it first, but we'll get there. In the parks, the Disney parks, robotics, definitely there. Lots of programming that goes into stuff at the Disney parks, the rides, and all of that. So there's a ton of stuff in the entertainment industry, obviously, whether it be television, film, resorts and parks, theater, that's supported by, technology of the type that a lot of your students are studying, I'm sure.
I think we had one more person who was trying to speak earlier. Go ahead and ask your question. Or maybe their audio is just on. Does anybody have any final question here? All right. Well, Mimi, we thank you so much for being here today. It's been a tremendous honor to hear from you. Thank you very much. one
Thank
thing I'd
you.
like to do is to take a photo with you, with everybody. So everybody turn on your cameras, and we're going to take a photo here with Mimi. So let me see here. There we go. All right. And everybody smile. And 3, 2, and all right. That's great. We'll take one more picture, just that way we have an option. Here we go. All right. And we'll do it again. 1, 2, and 3. Okay, great. So Mimi, I just want to say again, from everybody here, thank you very much. We know that you could spend your Saturday night doing many other things. We're honored to hear from you here. Your access to industry is impressive. The work that you've done is impressive, and your words are very thoughtful and encouraging. So thank you very much. I guess without further ado, I guess we'll say goodnight to you. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Really enjoyed it. And thank you all for being such a great a room and great audience. So thank you and take care.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
good night.
Good
Thank you
night.
very much.
Good
Good
night.
night. Thank you.
Thanks, Mimi.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
All right. Hello, everybody. How are you? How was that? She, that Mimi is really what she's seen. She's being very humble. She's the director of production operations at Disney, right? So when I talk about, Iron Man or Batman or Wonder Woman or any of the biggest movies you've ever heard of, she's part of the biggest theatrical productions that exist on Earth, right? So, Hugh Jackman, for example, right? So his plays, Greatest Showman, all of these other things that are out there, she's part of these productions. And she's worked on obviously the smaller scale and the larger scale. But the idea that her 30 plus year career, you can see the growth. But when I asked the question about what do you remember, you remember most? What she remembered most was the thing that was maybe the most challenging job she ever had, right? The one where they did a play in one city, got in a bus, drove to another city, right? And it's not the glamour, it's not all the money and the lights and Broadway. Obviously, I'm sure she prefers the salary that she's making now more, but it's really the passion. And what I love is to see somebody who's speaking from a 30-year career. Most of us are not going to have that type of one place, one type of industry just for 30 years. The reality of the world is that we sometimes shift in and out of different types of jobs. But for her to be so happy throughout all of it, that's really, really splendid to see. So I hope it was enriching for all of you. Did you have a good time?
You did. Thank you for.
She's not here, so you can say anything you want. Yeah, okay. You enjoyed it. I'm glad. All right, so I'm going to put this EMS assignment up again. The most important thing is just some takeaways that you got. Okay, that's what I'm most interested in. I don't want this to be a difficult labor for you. I want you just to write up what the experience was, what your takeaway is, what it means to you moving forward. Okay. If I think what I might do is I might open up the EMS. So if some of you did not turn in your last assignment, I'm probably going to open that AMS so that you can do it after this meeting here. So definitely upload it immediately. I'm going to open up the EMS to make it a little bit later for today's assignment. Okay, well, I'm going to see some of you tomorrow at 9 in the morning. So get some sleep for those people that were there. Otherwise, I will see you next time. I think our next class is in April. I don't know the exact date, but when I get to EMS, of course, I'll see. In April, we have another class. So make sure to be at that. ITU Presents. And without further ado, I'd like to say goodnight to all of you. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Jake.
Okay, great.
And we're clear.
Yep. Thanks, Han. That was great. That was a really fast dropout.
Maybe I should
That
do-
was like perfect. That was like 10 seconds and everyone was gone.
Yeah. By the way, when you edit, so when you edit, you want to edit when I make the second introduction.